Well, I think trying to raise kids in this cultural moment is not for the heart of faint. The faint heart. It is a hard thing, isn't it? Really hard. And I think today what I really want to do is to speak especially to those of you who have young kids. But what I'm going to say I think also applies if you have older kids. And it also applies if you have no children at all, because all of us are children of God. And it turns out that what we're going to talk about actually applies to all of us. And it actually applies to us thinking about our own childhood and maybe things we need to give thanks for in our own childhood, or maybe things we need to unlearn from our own childhood. Listen to what God says to all of us as his children in Psalm 32, verse 8. God says to you, and he says to me, I will instruct you and teach you in the way that you should go. I will counsel you and watch over you. But then listen to what parents are told in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. So think about that. The way that God shepherds our hearts and sets a path for us and says, this is the way you should walk in it. In the same way, those of you who are parents are supposed to set a path for your children and say, this is the way you are to walk in it. In other words, and here's the hairy part, you are to represent God to your young children. That's pretty sobering. They're going to do that anyway. And so it's actually better for you to realize, oh my gosh, God has given me this responsibility. I'm a representative of God to my children. So what does it mean to walk in this path? It means a pattern of thought and a pattern of behavior. It means this is the way to behave in the world, and this is the way to see the world. This is how the world works. And why would God give us this path? To set us up for success, because he loves us, because he knows where the good way is, because he wants you to be all that you were meant to be. Why would we give this path to our children? Because we want them to be all they can be, and we want to bless them. So sometimes, when we hear about this, hey, this is the path and walk in it, we go, well, that sounds like you're repressing the child. No, this is about freedom. If you've ever done wilderness travel, if you've ever been in the backcountry and actually tried to walk and hike where there is no path and you're full of thorns and thistles, and then you get onto a path, it is freedom. It gives you the ability to go somewhere. And that's what this is about. So what I'm going to try and do with you this morning is actually talk about a Christian worldview for how to raise children, because it gets really theologically deep really quick, and it's really important that we get this. And the first distinctive is this. How many times recently have you heard someone say, and I'm not judging you if you've said this, but I'm throwing it out. How many times have you heard somebody say, oh, I'm not going to, force a religion on my kids. I'm just going to let my child find their own way. That is not a gift to your child. What is a gift to your child is to give them a path to walk in, to give them a pattern to use, a pattern and a path that they can test, and they can choose to rebel against, and when they become an adult, they can choose to either reject it or adapt it. That is the real gift, because a small child needs to focus on small child tasks, not the existential dilemmas of adulthood. Children need training wheels. You think about training wheels, they limit you, right? They bind you up so that you can learn to ride your bike. That's what we have to do for our kids, not to repress them so they can learn to ride their bike and learn it well. Maybe grow up to be Jeff Craighead and do an MS thing in just a little while. We need that. Our kids need that. And it's so hard to hear that in this cultural moment. They need a scaffold to build upon. And so the foundation that we're talking about today is one that has been used for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years, and actually some pretty amazing people have come out of it. Parents have done a really good job raising their kids. Okay, so then the question becomes, but particularly, how should we raise our kids? One of the reasons I think it is so very hard to know how to parent your children in this cultural moment is because of this. what the experts say is right is constantly changing. The pendulum swings to one extreme, and then it swings to the other. So in the 1950s, we had Dr. Spock. In the 1970s, we had latchkey kids. In the 1990s, we had helicopter parents. And now, the two big movements today are intensive parenting and gentle parenting, or mindful parenting. And so it's a moving target. And parents are always trying to figure out, like, where should we be? How should we raise our kids? And what all these theories have in common is they always make parents feel like they're failing. You know, you read this stuff and it's like, oh, we're not keeping up with that. Oh, we missed that new thing. So they're always making us. I mean, it's a cottage industry to make parents feel like they're failing all the time. Some parents are so anxious to parent correctly that they make their children anxious. When I look out at our culture right now, a lot of what I see are anxious parents raising anxious children. And here's what we need to remember. What is hot, what is in vogue, what is fashionable today will be out of fashion 10 years from now. As a matter of fact, if I was preaching this sermon 20 years ago, I would be pulling you a different way than I'm pulling you today, because the pendulum was in a different place than it is now. I believe that it is exactly the basic, slow, solid wisdom of the ages that is most needed right now in this current, frenetic, fleeting, high-tech whirlpool that you and your children are in. And so what I want to tell you is, all those parenting advice on all those podcasts and parenting groups, we need to take it all with a grain of salt, because here's the truth. It will take a generation or two to find out if they were right. You will not know if the latest parenting techniques you're hearing were better for your children or made them worse until we've had a generation or two to study its effects. Like, what's a 45-year-old look like that was raised that way? And so by the time we find out if it was good or not, it's too late. Your kids are already grown. So we need to hold all these things that we're hearing in our culture very loosely. I think if we hold on to what did parents do for thousands upon thousands of years, that will help us. And you know what? Think about this. The greatest people who have ever lived, who've accomplished the most things, the most beautiful people in all of history, didn't have the privilege of being raised with the most recent parenting techniques. So what I want to do is I want to evaluate two very popular ways of raising children right now, which are actually opposite extremes. And so I want to look at both of them and compare them to Scripture and what Scripture actually reveals. I want to look at these two in the light of the wisdom of Scripture. So the first one is what I mentioned, the gentle parenting or mindful parenting approach. And I want to say there are a lot of things that are really good about it. There's a lot to commend about it. New York Times writer Jessica Winter describes it this way. You might know where I'm going. One of the major themes in the gentle parenting discourse is that children don't defy for the sake of defiance, but that their challenging behavior is a physiological response to stress and should be seen as essentially adaptive. The assumption unto itself is questionable. If little Timmy is on the front lawn tossing garden implements at traffic, his motivations are probably obscurer than just stress. This is one of the most confounding dilemmas of parenting, especially as kids exit the toddler stage, that sometimes a child tests or destroys boundaries for the thrill of it. Under the gentle parenting schema, a child's every act must be seen through a lens of anxiety and threat detection, which heightens a parent's dual role of child psychologist and emotional security guard. And that's a lot of work. Now, as I said, there are a lot of beautiful things in this movement to commend. First of all, They're trying to honor the personhood of the child. The child is not just an extension of me. They are a self, and they should be respected as a self. And the child's interior world really matters. Like what their little mind is thinking, what they're feeling, their emotions, all of that is really important. And I can't be just through that. Like I need to be dialed into what is going on in my kid. That's a good thing. And because of that, I do need to be flexible in my parenting. Like maybe there's a certain situation that's really unusual, and I need to take that into account with, oh yeah, they're going through this. I need to remember that. So that part is really good, right? That's really good. But what is it really implying? That the child, it's not their fault, anything they do. Everything is because of something that has happened to them from the outside. I believe that one of the most important things a parent needs to do is create a stable, predictable environment for their children to grow in. Like not crazy world. We mediate the world to our kids. The world is chaos. Our job is to create a dependable world so they can do child-sized things in an environment. They don't have to be worrying about the big questions of life. They can be kids. Well, when the world is not predictable, when there are no unchanging rules, when the rules always change depending on how the child is feeling, when the exterior world has to adapt to their interior world, when parents fail to say no, this is the path and we will walk in it whether we feel like it or not. They may be doing that out of love for the child and hoping to lower the child's anxiety, but they're actually raising the child's anxiety. Children know intuitively that they're not good gods. Children know intuitively that when you give them too much power in the family system, it's crazy. They couldn't articulate it, but they feel it. And they're miserable. They're absolutely miserable. Skinner goes on, if members of Gen X can blame their high rates of depression and anxiety on latchkey parenting, so you guys, what your age is, think about yourself. And if millennials can blame their high rates of depression and anxiety on helicopter parenting, then perhaps a new generation can anticipate blaming their high rate of depression and anxiety on the over-validation and under-correction native to gentle parenting. And again, if this was 20 years ago, I would be arguing the opposite direction. So what happens when the pendulum swings too far into the gentle parenting or mindful parenting direction? Well, I'm going to show you a message from that school of thought. It's an extreme of the school. I'm going to show you a message, and I want you to tell me what's wrong with it. So for those of you listening on the podcast, we're looking at a very big, angry father yelling and screaming at a little son who is weeping. And the text says, if your child is lying, it means you overreacted to the mistakes in the past. So what's wrong with this? It's too simple. It's propaganda. All propaganda has a little bit of truth in it, but it's too simple. And almost all propaganda divides the world into good guys and bad guys. So who's the bad guy up here? The parent. Who's the good guy? The kid. Now, is this sometimes true? Yeah, like if you've got an abusive parent who's like beating you or emotionally abusive, yeah, you're going to lie to avoid it. Like if you told the truth and you got beat last time, then this time I'm going to lie, right? Like yes, that part's true. But hopefully in most of our households, that isn't really happening. And 90% of the time, the reason the child is lying is because they're intentionally trying to deceive you to get what they want. That's why they're doing it. All you have to do is remember your own childhood. Didn't you do that? Like, I'm going to say this because I want to get that. And so you see, this is just too simple. And so when it comes to parenting theories or it comes to political theories, there are things that look really good on paper. And then you look at how actual real people live. And you have to test your theory against how do actual human beings behave? Does this theory describe human beings at their best? And does it describe them at their worst? And if it can do both, it's a pretty good theory. And if it can't, it's not a good theory. And this is why the Christian worldview to me is so unbelievably beautiful, because it doesn't divide the world into good guys and bad guys. What kind of guys are we? Are we good guys or bad guys? I think we're bad guys. Some people are worse than others. But we're all bad guys. And so are your kids. Now you got to get this right. That's not the whole Christian view. The Christian view holds two ideas together at the same time. If you remove either one, it gets gross. And most worldviews only hold one. But Christianity holds both in tension. Christianity teaches first, you are created in the image of God. Your child is created in the image of God. They have innate worth, innate value. They are precious beyond measure. They are worthy of respect as a self that God has created. And they have a sinful heart. They were not born innocent. They were born fallen. Now, certainly, environment, society can corrupt somebody and make them far worse. But you don't have to put selfishness into your child's heart. It's already there. You do not have to put envy in your child's heart. You don't have to, it's already there. Now, I love my kids beyond measure. I hope I would be willing to lay my life down for my children. And they're so good and they're so precious. But they, like me, have a black thread running right through our heart. And here's the deal. The holier, you're like, not my Nana. My Nana would never do. Well, guess what? If your Nana is as good and holy as you say she is, she's the one who knows the most her own failings. The holier you are, the more you're in the light. The more you're in the light, the more you see the dirt. Show me a holy person, and I'll show you someone who can go, man, I failed at this, I didn't do that right. They're aware, they're self-aware. And part of self-awareness is realizing, I'm of immeasurable worth, I can do good things, but I've got a bent heart. I'm both at the same time. And so what this parenting approach does is it can't stand the idea of human sin, so it tries to come up with all these other ideas to explain the situation. No, this is part of us. We need to turn into it. And so what I need to do when I'm trying to teach my children is, rather than like, oh, you have all these reasons that you can't do what's right. It's like, no, honey, sometimes we have to do what's right even when we don't feel like it. Sometimes we'd have to do it even when we don't feel like it. And so what I want to do when I'm raising my child is I want to teach them that lying is wrong. But here's the thing. Lying isn't wrong because I said so. And lying isn't wrong because you hurt my feelings when you lie. Lying is wrong because that is built into the universe. It is built into reality. This is the way the world works. It's not my idea, it's God's idea. I'm not asking you to do this because it's my idea. This is God's idea. This is the way the world works. This is the path that you should walk on. This is the way that you should go. That is the way I need to present this to my child, that this is the way the world works. And when I don't do that, when I just let them do whatever they want, we think that we're loving them, but we're actually crippling them. We're telling them they have no agency in the world. I have no ability to contain or constrain myself. I have no ability to walk a path even when it's hard. No, I want them to learn I can walk a path even when it's hard. I want to know that. And why am I giving them this rule? Because I love them and I want to see them grow and be free and be competent adults. Okay, so if one extreme is to basically not be able to admit human fallenness is in all of us, there was a reaction to that, mostly by Christians, to tell you the truth, and they swung the opposite way. So now I'm going to show you one more poster. This is a poster I found online from a parenting group that are Christians, and this is the way you can tell if you're raising your kids correctly according to this model. So I recently found this parenting flashcard, and this is what it said. Question: when does a child need a spanking? Answer: when you have given a directive that he has heard and is within his capacity to understand, and he has not obeyed without challenge, without excuse, or without delay, then he needs a spanking. Well, let me ask you something. Have you ever met a child who obeyed every command they were ever given joyfully, without challenge, and without delay? Would you even want to meet a kid like that? You can get a child to be compliant that way. You can get kids to avoid punishment that way, but that won't make them competent. That won't make them self-regulating out of love for God. See, their job is to challenge and question and ask why. You got to do this. Dad, why? Why do I have to do that? I don't understand. Why do I have to do that? And my job is to try and explain the reason, but also not to cave, right? Their job is to challenge, and my job is to not cave, because when you cave, the path begins to fall apart. I can't cave. I got to give them this consistent path. That's their job. That's my job. And so how did they get into this extreme? Here's what I think. Here's where their theology and child raising, it all comes together. What they think is the primary attribute between me and God is authority, and therefore the primary attribute of my relationship with my child is my authority over them. Both are wrong. The primary attribute of my relationship to God is love, and it's exactly because he loves me that he exercises authority over me. Because he wants me to walk in the right way where life is found. And so my primary attribute of my relationship with my child is I love them, and it's because I love them that I exercise authority over them. Now we get, in our cultural moment, like we think all hierarchy is terrible. No, corrupt hierarchy is terrible. God designed it that there would be a hierarchy in the family, and it's for the child's benefit. So I'm not exercising authority, and I'm like, Johnny, go get me another beer. Like that's not authority, right? That's just you being a lazy bum, right? No. What we're talking about is I'm exercising authority for my child because it's what's best for them. I'm trying to teach them the path. So it's not what's easy for me. It's not them being my servant. It's me doing what is best for them to create a predictable, stable place where they can grow, and they can only deal with kid issues instead of adult issues. What we find between these two extremes of authoritarianism and non-authoritarianism is the beautiful balance found in the scriptures. So our scripture for today is Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1, going to verse 4. We looked at this a little bit earlier, a couple weeks ago, when we were looking at parents. This is what it says starting in verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And we said back then, the Greek word here literally is little children. This is not saying 30-year-olds you should obey your parents. That's not what it's saying. It's saying little children. Little children, obey your parents. Why? Because it's right. Because God says so. Because this is the path, walk in it. Dropping down to verse 4, but fathers and mothers, and that word fathers really means fathers and mothers, do not exasperate your children. In Galatians, Paul's talking about the same thing, and he says, do not embitter your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. So, what's a parent's job? I see here 5 things. Here's the first one. Don't exasperate or embitter your children. Well, what kind of parenting exasperates, drives your kids crazy, or makes them bitter? The 2 extremes I just talked about. Show me a really miserable kid, and 9 times out of 10, not always, but 9 times out of 10, they either had a really authoritarian, rigid, unloving taskmaster, or they had a parent who was trying to be their buddy, who refused to enforce the rules. It's a form of neglect. So both extremes cause kids to get embittered. It causes them it just drives them crazy. So let's look at the 4 things we should do in raising our kids. Bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Bring them up. We need to actively help them become free, competent adults able to nurture other people. So it's not just, hey, you're in my house for these years and then you're out on your own. No, it's like I have to be actively involved in bringing them up. The goal is not to keep them under control. The goal is to launch them, right? So I have to be actively involved in bringing them up, helping them grow. In the training, okay, so that means I actually can't, again, just sit at the TV and watch TV. I actually have to train my kids in ways of living, give them practice in living a certain way. This is the way we do life. This is the way we do life. Walk in it. So when they're tying their shoes, learning how to tie their shoes, or they're learning how to change a tire, what are they doing? They're rehearsing for when they're out on their own. So I need to be active in actually training them. But look at the next one, and instruction. Teaching them, this is right, this is wrong, this is true, this is false, this is what matters. And I think that's the one that's really hard for us in this cultural moment. Well, who am I to say what's right and wrong? Who am I to say this is true and this is false? Who's to say? You are. Well, how if I'm wrong? I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that. Bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. It is your responsibility as a parent to expose your kids to the things of God, to help them understand who God is, to help them understand why they need to obey God, to help them understand what sin is, age appropriately, and to help them understand the love and the forgiveness that are found in Jesus. You want to talk about the psychological health that you can give to your children by teaching them a Christian worldview. Think about your average teenager. There's some terrible thing posted about them on social media, and what do they say? My life is over. Or they really screw up. My life is over. No. When you understand the world this way, we believe in the God of second chances. We believe in the forgiveness and the love and the mercy of Jesus Christ. It's never over, honey. It's never. You can always start again. I know that broke your heart, but the past doesn't own us. Jesus is calling us into the future. You have no idea what he's going to do. We serve the God of second chances. You can always begin again. What a gift to give your children. Now look again at the main picture command we started out with. I will instruct you and teach you in the way that you should go, and I will counsel you and watch over you. And you should train a child in the way he should go. And I want to mention again that we have 4 different messages on raising kids beside this one that you can get from our archives. So if you're watching online, if you go to the YouTube notes, if you're here, if you check the email, you'll find all these different messages. We've talked about practical ways to raise your kids. I'm focusing on just a few of them today. But look at that. Train a child in the way he should go. One of your major jobs as a parent is modeling. This is what it looks like to be an adult. Now I'm going to get a little hairier on you. Even more important, moms, you are to model. This is what it means to be a woman. And dads, you need to model. This is what it means to be a man. This is what femininity looks like. This is what masculinity looks like. Oh, no way now, Langdon. This is sounding pretty tone deaf to the issues that we are struggling with in this culture right moment. Well, maybe. Or maybe our culture is tone deaf to the responsibilities of parents. Are there rare exceptions to what I just said? Yes. Are there people struggling with gender dysphoria? Yes. Are there people that are born with ambiguous genitalia? Yes. But those are rare exceptions. And when you encounter that person, you are to love them and surround them with compassion and mercy and be for them and to support them. But here's the thing, you guys. There is a world of difference between in loving and accepting an individual in front of you and capitulating to an ideology. Those are 2 very different things. The loudest voices in our culture and the so-called experts don't get to define for your children what it means to be a man or it means to be a woman. God did not give them that authority. God gave you that authority as a parent. I don't care if you don't feel qualified. None of us are qualified. That is your job. And you might say, but what if I'm wrong? Like, you're saying this is the path. Well, there's lots of paths and lots of people have lots of opinions. How about if I teach my kids the wrong path? This is the main point, parents, I want you to get today. Misdirected authority, which be I said to my kids, walk in this path, and it was the wrong path, okay? Misdirected authority is nowhere near as devastating to a child as no authority at all. A parent saying, hey, I don't know, you can make it up for yourself, whatever you think, you decide for yourself. That is far worse than a parent who teaches their child a partially wrong thing. The French sociologist Émile Durkheim argued that if you exercise your authority over your children badly, they will rebel against it, and they will choose a better form of authority for their own lives. But if you don't give them any authority, if you refuse to exercise the authority over them that you should, they will never grow up to know there's a right and a wrong, and so they'll never grow up into the freedom they could have had by being a morally grounded person. They will have no skill to discern good from bad. Yeah, but I mean, this is not what we're hearing, and maybe I'm wrong, and who am I to say my way is right and everyone else's way is wrong? Maybe I should just keep silent. Maybe I should let the professionals shape my child's worldview. No. Raise up your child in the way that they should go as best as you know how. And then once they become an adult, give them the space to either embrace it or reject it. They can reject your path, and you have to be willing to pour your life into giving them this path, knowing that they get to 18 or 21 or whatever, and they say, no, I reject it. That's okay. It'll break my heart, but I still love you. There's nothing you could ever do that would make me love you less. But giving them a path is better, 10 times better than no path at all. And you're being told not to give your children a path. It's no good. No, raise them up in the way they should go. Get them to the point where they can decide as an adult, I choose to reject it, but don't do it before then. Don't do it when they're young. Let kids be kids. So parents, do not be shamed into silence by the loud voices in our culture. Do not yield your ground. You are the parents. You are the parents. Trust in God. Trust in yourself. It's going to be good enough. So in conclusion, of all the things our kids should know, all the things we want them to know, all the ways that we could enrich them, what are the ones we want them to know most? What matters most? What do I want my kids to know most? Here's my list. Maybe yours is different. Maybe you'll hear something here. It's like, yeah, I really want to turn into that. The first thing I want my kids to know is God loves you and knows you by name. And the second thing I want them to know is we love you, and there is nothing you could ever do that would make us love you less. There is nothing you could ever do that would make us love you less. But there is a right and there is a wrong, and we will give you consequences if you intentionally do what is wrong. And finally, the obvious. Don't be a brat. Don't be intentionally mean. Always tell the truth. Stand up to bullies. There are adventures to be had, and when you do it with a gang of friends, it's even better. There are wonderful songs to be sung and books to be read, and the world is waiting for you. There's so many beautiful things out there for you to taste and touch and feel. But remember, all your abilities are a gift from God, so be humble. We expect you to work hard and strive to be all you can be. But life is complicated, and we too have a lot of questions. We don't have all the answers, but we're confident in God, and we will figure a way to get through this together. In conclusion, listen to Psalm 78, verses 1 through 8. Listen to what it says about the laws and the works of God. We will not hide them from our children. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord. He commanded our forefathers to teach their children so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. Then they would put their trust in God and would not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands. That is our calling as parents. Let us do this. Let us rest in it. It's going to be good enough. Raise them up in the path that they should go. Amen. Thanks for joining us today as we strive to think carefully about our faith. You can help keep this ministry on the air by making a donation at leverington.org. For now, may the Lord bless you and keep you. We'll see you next time.